This is me before reading Alchemized. This is me after reading Alchemized. Hi, let's talk about Alchemized by SenLinYu, the book that everybody's talking about this fall. I'm going to share with you a compilation of my non-spoiler reviews, book discussions with some major spoilers, and last but not the least, movie adaptation. And we're going to talk about how this book should be adapted into a movie and fan casting. If you're watching this video, you probably know what Alchemized is all about, but if you don't, this book is in the gothic dark fantasy genre, set in the fictional world of Paladia, and the magic system is based on alchemy. It is told in third close-person point of view through our character Helena Marino, who is a healer who has lost her memories from the war. And after being in solitary captivity for 14 months, everyone wants to know what she is protecting in her memory. And to unlock them, she is sent to the High Reeve, who everyone fears the most. Let's get started with our review and book discussion, and if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Here's my initial reaction on reading Alchemized by SenLinYu. This is non-spoilery and I have read part 1. And I have to reiterate that you don't have to have read Manacled to read Alchemized. But if you have, and I actually listened to the podfic back in 2023, I actually never read it with my eyes. And I purposely did not reread it before the book came out. Because again, you don't have to read and enjoy Alchemized. However, but if you're worried because you've read Manacled, you're not going to enjoy Alchemized, let me tell you, I honestly think I'm enjoying the reading experience more with Alchemized than I did with Manacled. And again, maybe it's because I just listened to the podfic, I wasn't reading it with my eyes. I just find the details of the story a lot more interesting, a lot more gripping. But because I did read Manacled, so there are parts in the story in part 1 that I was very hyper aware of the significance of, that I know is going to be very relevant later on in the story. And those are the moments I find myself screaming into the pillow or just walking away from the book because I know the significance or the heaviness of that moment in the story. And let me tell you, the High Reeve is high reeving, so you don't have to worry about that. And if I'm gonna be real honest, I don't like Hermione as much in Manacled. I find her character very frustrating, and I might change my mind as I read part 2 and part 3 of Alchemized, but I find Helena to be a lot more likable and interesting in Alchemized. And what I like about Alchemized so far, again, I don't know what's going to happen in part 2 and part 3, is that while yes, there are many beats that are very similar to Manacled, but I also like that it wasn't a direct translation when it comes to characters. There are a couple of characters that I'm actually very happy to see in Alchemized that were in Manacled, but I'm also happy that not every single character that was present in Manacled part 1 is all over part 1 of Alchemized. In fact, I don't think some of them exist at all. And I am not a book crier, but there are definitely 2 scenes or maybe 3 scenes in part 1 that generally brought me to tears, and it was kind of unexpected. Mainly because I thought it was never going to happen in part 1, but it actually did. And it's just more harrowing because Farron and Helena already been through so much in part 1, and for that to also happen in part 1 when I thought it was already excluded in the story, when it was present in Manacled, I was kind of ugh. So that's why I really felt bad for the 2 characters. And again, Helena and Farron, if you loved Hermione in Manacled, they give off the same vibes, but they are not the same characters, if that makes any sense. And they're really gonna grip you from the very start, from the very first time you meet them. Again, you don't have to have read Manacled to enjoy Alchemized. I honestly think it is a lot better if you haven't read Manacled or haven't read it in a long time to really get into the book. However, if you have read Manacled, you're still going to enjoy it. It's still going to be a great experience reading it, as I'm finding out after reading just part 1. And honestly, the experience that I'm having now, you will also get the same experience if you haven't read Alchemized, but after you read Alchemized and come reread it, I have a feeling that the experience that I'm having now reading Alchemized, having read Manacled, will be the same once you have reread Alchemized. Part 2 of Alchemized is why this book needed to be published. The story is so much richer, the world is so much bigger, the characters are better, the character motivations makes a lot more sense. Now that, dare I say, this story is no longer manacled to its predecessor's original world. Because ultimately, that world is a story about good versus evil. Yeah, you can make the argument that some characters are ambiguous, they played both sides, but it's a clear story of good versus evil. So while I love the predecessor, ultimately, I just didn't completely buy the character motivations and why I found those characters kind of frustrating while reading the story. But in Alchemized, the two sides are not that clear cut. Both sides have legitimate grievances and both sides have hidden agendas, which makes the motivations of both Helena and Farron a lot more believable and a lot more understandable. Like everyone in this book is just operating in lies, and no one is really playing by the rules anymore. So it makes sense for both Helena and Farron to say, why should they? And ultimately, it's about war and power grab and survival. I also like the political commentary within the lore, but it wasn't trying hard, it wasn't like too in your face, it wasn't beating your head in it. It's just seamlessly part of the plot and story. And in a way, it actually kind of reminds me of The Hunger Games. Two very completely different story. And I'm not saying this is now ripping The Hunger Games. Totally not. I just see everything through The Hunger Games lenses, and a lot of the political commentary made in this, or how it's told, just reminds me of The Hunger Games. And honestly, Helena and Farron reminded me of Katniss and Peeta in a way that they are so adamant in saving and protecting each other. Helena and Farron just have like ramped it 1,000 times, but they do it at the expense even of their own lives and maybe even at the cost of other people's lives. The last 5 chapters of part 2 in particular took me like 3 days to read because each chapter was just like big reveal, big plot twist, and it just takes you on an emotional roller coaster ride that I really can't proceed to the next chapter without processing what I just read. And there was a big reveal in chapter 63 that I'm upset with myself that I didn't see coming because in hindsight it was so obvious. And now that I finished part 2, I kind of want to go back to part 1 and read it before going to part 3. Part 2 just gave a lot more context to the things that we read in part 1, so I just want to see it with that knowledge in mind and then jump on to part 3. So I'm not in a hurry to finish this book, I really want to savor it, so I think I'm going to read part 1 again first and then go read part 3. This book altered my brain chemistry. Reading part 3 of Alchemized is like a roller coaster that never goes down, or however that saying goes. Tears won't stop coming the moment I started reading part 3 all the way through the end. And I didn't even react that way when reading its predecessor. Like, I was moved, I was touched, but I wasn't like bawling. When I got to part 3, I was actually concerned how they were going to wrap everything up in just less than 200 pages. So many things were still left unresolved, not just from the flashbacks, but also in the present with Helena and Farron, but also with the war. But I was satisfied with how the story was resolved. I was very content with what happened with Helena and Farron, but I did have some lingering questions. You could check out my other video on that. And I also felt with the predecessor, the ending is a cop-out. But in here, the ending, the same ending, just make a lot more sense. It feels like Kane and Helena just did everything that they could do, and they're now doing what they must do. And that's why I think the last line of this book hits so much harder. Even if you were spoiled by it, whether by the predecessor or by this book, you would still feel all the feelings by the time you read that last line. For me, part 3 is the best part of this book. The journey to get to part 3 is great, but part 3 made everything that I went through in the first 2 parts all worth it by the time I got to part 3. I've been seeing reviews of Alchemized, and I've seen some people say that it is good, but they still don't see why this book is 1,000 pages long. I'm not saying it's an invalid critique, but I also think that critique results from people just wanting instant gratification and have short attention spans. We see it on TikTok every day, we see it with TV shows, with movies. Hell, even when watching sports, like watching the Olympics, people just want to get to the good parts and not take time to savor the slow but important parts of a story. As someone who has read the predecessor to this book and have yet to read part 3 of this book, I don't know how they're going to wrap everything up in less than 100 pages. I actually think this could have used more pages. And in connection to that, people say there's a lot of info dumping when it comes to the world building at the beginning of the book. And I actually agree to that. But now that I think about it, is it really info dumping or is it just a world that we're not familiar with? Just now that I read up to the end of part 2, the magic system is not really that complicated. It's very straightforward. While some aspects of it I think could use a bit more refinement, some aspects of it I think should have been elaborated a little bit more. Hence more paragraphs and even pages on it. But some also say there's a lot more tell than show in some parts of the book, and I totally agree. But because this was told in close third person, there are just some events that we're not privy to, but there are some events that I think that they could have elaborated on than just gloss over, but again, that would require more pages. And again, I'm not disputing that alchemists probably need a little bit more editing, but in my opinion, better editing would actually lead to more pages in this book. And even if it leads to less pages, people are kidding themselves that this story could be condensed into 500 or 600 pages. So even if this was edited down to the bare bones of the story, I think it would still require at least 800 pages to tell the entire story of the book and make it make sense and make it still good. How are you pronouncing the names of the characters in this book? I've heard a lot of people say Helena, I say Helena. And the audiobook is probably going to clarify a lot of this. But I've heard Sen say multiple times it's Helena, so I guess it is Helena. And I think we're all in agreement Cain Farron is Cain Farron. Is it Paladins or Paladins? Bayard or Bayard? And I switch back and forth with Lila Bayard or Lila Bayard. And Soren is just Soren. And this is the most important one. Do you pronounce Luke as Luke? Because in the middle of the book, it was revealed that Luke is short for Lucian. So is Luke pronounced Luke or Luge? Or is Lucian pronounced as Lucian? It might be pronounced differently. And I think the rest of them are pretty straightforward, like Moro is Moro, or do you pronounce it Moro? Let me know how you pronounce the character names in this book. I finished Alchemized, but before I give my review, I have a couple of questions regarding the book that I need some clarification. Maybe I missed it, so some of you might be able to explain it to me. First is Elaine Boyle. The book made it seem, especially at the beginning, that she's an important character, but she's not. She wasn't really a significant character or present at all in part 3, the way part 1 made it seem that she would be. Yes, there's a reveal to her purpose in part 2, but part 2 is supposed to be the past. So I'm under the impression that she was also important in the present, but she really wasn't. So was she just a red herring for the sisters? Second is the toll, which is a very significant thing that could have killed Helena in the present time. And yes, it was disproven that pregnancy is not going to take away her vitality. But Helena still believed that there would come a time that she would leave the baby to Farron, because the toll is going to catch up to her. And I know how it was like for the original effect, that it did catch up for Hermione and that she died before Draco. But they still had a full life and a happy life, happier than they thought they could have together. Obviously in Alchemized that wasn't addressed. It was almost kind of left in a cliffhanger what their future was going to be. But I just thought the toll was going to have a more immediate effect on Helena, but again, it wasn't addressed at all after she gave birth. I know Cain did something with the stone in him on Helena with his resonance that maybe slowed down the effects of the toll, but I'm not sure. And in part 3, did Farron's hair turn back into dark hair, or he was just dyeing it so that people won't recognize him? I finished this book a couple of days ago, but I'm still thinking about chapter 63 of this book. So if you haven't gotten that far, please scroll, because I'm going to talk about some spoilers. I'm so mad that I did see that twist coming. I have read Manacled. I have read all 7 Harry Potter books. And I'm going to repeat, you don't need any external content to read Alchemized. There's also nothing Harry Potter that can be found in this book. But again, because I read Harry Potter, I should have seen the twist coming. Because that twist in chapter 63 is Mad Eye Moody was Barty Crouch Jr. all along, plus Harry is a Horcrux, plus Cursed Child plotline. And again, this did not rip off Harry Potter in any way. It doesn't violate any IP. It's in the same vein when I said it reminds me a bit of Hunger Games because of politics and the relationship between Helena and Cain, and that it's divided into 3 parts. But the twist just caught me off guard. I might just be dumb, I don't know. I'm just mad at myself that I didn't see it coming, because it is that type of Bruce Willis was dead all along in Sixth Sense type of thing. I'm going to defend my fan cast for Cain Farron, because I've seen a couple of videos already float around of people criticizing people's fan casting of Cain Farron, and for me, fan cast whoever you want, it's just for the fun of it. However, I had a semi-viral comment regarding fan casting Cain Farron, and I feel like those criticisms are a little bit digged at that comment. But not taking it personally, but I thought that's a good opportunity to share my defense of my fan casting for Cain Farron. Now, this is the art of Cain Farron by Avondale, who is the official artist for Alchemized. And I understand the pushback that their only requirement can't be he looks good both in dark hair and blonde hair, but I never said that's the only requirement. But I do think it's an important requirement because not many actors can pull both dark hair and blonde hair. And being able to look the part is also an important part of the character. They can be a very good actor, but if how they look doesn't match the character in your mind, you're not gonna buy it. And the actor that I fan cast is actually a very good actor. He has proven that in the projects that we've seen so far, and he's a Julian trained actor. More importantly, this is the actor that got me into Dramoini. I know nothing about Dramoini, I know nothing about Draco Talk or the High Reeve, but everyone said when his movie came out, that's how they pictured the High Reeve. That he is so Draco coded, he is High Reeve coded. Kane Farron is not Draco, but now that I have read Alchemized, I am more convinced that this actor is the best actor to play Kane Farron. And that is Tom Blythe. No surprise there if you've gotten this far in this video. We know he looks good both in blonde and in dark hair, as we've seen in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and also in Billy the Kid. And people would say he is too babyface, he's not scary and mean looking enough to play the High Reeve. May I remind people again that his most famous roles are Coriolanus Snow in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and Billy the Kid. We know Snow is not a good person. He is a terrible person. And I personally haven't seen his show Billy the Kid, but I've seen many clips of it. And just from what I know from Billy the Kid, he is not the most outstanding character either. Just that one scene in Ballad when he was searching for Lucy Gray in the forest and shooting all over, he was scary. He was unhinged. So I think he could really tap into being the High Reeve. And again, just to remind everyone, before I knew who the High Reeve was, everyone was telling me Tom Blythe as Snow is the High Reeve. And I can promise you, the resurgence or like the influx of new Dramoini fans or new Draco fans can be traced to this man playing the young Snow. Because that's how it was for me. Another argument is he is too baby-faced. This man is in his 30s. By the time they actually shoot Alchemized, he's going to be in his early 30s, maybe even closer to mid-30s. While I do hope they actually age up the characters in the movie, but canonically in the book, we meet Kane at the age of 16 all the way to the age of 23, maybe 24. So it's actually good that he could be baby-faced. For a good part of part 2, he is stuck in his 16-year-old body. So he needs to be able to be convincing to look like he is younger, who could pass at 16, maybe 18. So I think Tom Blythe could do that because he did that for The Ballad and Songbirds and Snakes. He was 27 when he played an 18-year-old young Snow. And because he is in his 30s, he could transition well into looking like the High Reeve. And this is my most important point when casting the High Reeve, whether it's Tom Blythe or anyone else. The High Reeve is not just the High Reeve. Actually, for the majority of the book, at least in my opinion, he is not the High Reeve. He is Kane Farron. And as Kane Farron, the man knows how to yearn. So he has to be a really good yearner, and I think Tom Blythe is a good yearner. But whether as Kane Farron or the High Reeve, he's more than just a scary, mean, violent psychopath. And I think it's very important, especially for the movie, despite his character doing a lot of terrible things, you need the audience to still be rooting for him. You still need the audience to feel sympathy towards him, and you also want the audience to be rooting for him to end up with Helena. And that is why I fan cast Tom Blythe as Kane Farron, aka the High Reeve. He has the versatility, he has the range, and yeah, he can look good both with dark hair and blonde hair, and he could pull off being a 16-year-old up to a 23-year-old or even older. Alchemized movie should adapt the book in chronological order and not in book order. Hear me out. If you have heard about and read the book Alchemized, you know by now that it is optioned to be a movie. Unlike other books that have been tapped to get a movie deal or a TV series, but it never materialized, I think Alchemized will actually become a feature film because SenLinYu has been having many meetings with Legendary, the studio that optioned Alchemized. And if you don't know Legendary, it is the same studio that produced Dune. And with Dune about to wrap up, it has a third movie coming out next year. I think Alchemized is going to be their next big project. And just like Dune, I think Alchemized is going to be a 2-part movie. I know I said there's a third Dune movie coming out, but I think that movie is based on another book in the series. And while others might argue that a limited series is the best way to adapt this book, I think Alchemized is just too big to just be relegated to a streaming service. I think Alchemized deserves a feature film just like Dune. And because the studio that optioned it is the same studio that did Dune, and because the book is so long, it is possible that they would want to split the movie into two. And personally, I don't mind that because I don't think one feature film is going to capture the entire book as well. It's going to be very watered down if they do. So the best way to do it is to divide it in two parts, and to make it effective two separate movies is to tell it chronologically. And we already know whether you like the book or not. The common feedback is part one is kind of hard to get through. And that is completely fine for the book format. It doesn't take away from the story if readers have a hard time going through the first part of the book. Especially for a fantasy series that's new to them, it is a very common experience. And also for books, whether it's slow burn or fast action, the reader dictates the pacing of the book. While for movies, it is the complete opposite. With movies, you really have just one chance to capture the audience, and it's within the first 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And if you're going to make audience slug through 2/3 of the movie, not knowing what's going on, very confused, and the last 30 or 40 minutes of the movie is just going to be a trailer for part two, the movie is going to flop. And if part one flops, there's no way we're going to get part two, unless they shoot the film back to back like they did with Dune. So I think for Alchemized the movie, part one should be part two of the book. They could start with the prologue as the cold open, but immediately after the title sequence, go straight to part two. And the entire of Alchemized part one is just going to cover the entirety of part two. And you can have end credits, that is the beginning of part one in the book. Like the end credits could be Helena going to Spirefell, and we see like a shadow of Cain. So by making Alchemized part 1, part 2 of the book, it will get audience to invest in the characters and into the story a lot quicker. It will also make audiences want to see part 2 because we showed them the prologue at the cold open, and we also included a scene or two from chapters 1, 2, and 3 for the end credits. So even if you make audiences wait a year later to watch the second part of the movie, it's okay. And when part 2 comes out, it covers part 1 and part 3 of the book. And in the first half of the movie, they will see callbacks to the first movie. And they will hear dialogues and see scenes that is covered in part 1 of the book that has been referenced already in part 1 of the movie, which is part 2 of the book if you're following along. I think that's the way to go. Alchemized movie part 1 is part 2 of the book, and Alchemized movie part 2 is part 1 and 3 of the book. And this is the most exciting part. Like maybe after a month or two of it showing in the theaters, they could do a double feature showing where it's actually the book order. Or they could release the DVD later on that has an option to watch it in chronological order or in the book order. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. And if there was a way to have a 4, 5, 6 hour Alchemized movie, I would go watch it. But the reality is that's not going to happen. And it's more than likely that they're going to split the book into 2 movies. And if they still decide to do book order, I think chapter 47 is a good point to split the movie. However, I think the movie has a risk of flopping if you do it that way. And it's not going to be as good if it's told chronologically. Because as mentioned, a lot of people have a hard time going through part 1 and honestly, even the first half of part 2. So if the entire part 1 of Alchemized movie is just up to chapter 47, where the payoff for the entire movie is going to be in the last 30 minutes of the movie, I don't think it's going to win a lot of people over. Because movies are made not just for the book fans, but also for the mainstream audiences. And I could already see critics bombing this movie, especially since part 2 is not going to be released until like at least a year later. Yes, there's a lot of world building that went on in part 1, but that's also in part 2 of the book, so they could just combine the world building aspect in part 2 of the book that they're going to cover in part 1 of the movie. And as I mentioned in my Cain Farron fancast video, it is still important for the audience to root for Cain despite of the terrible things it's going to do. Otherwise, we're just going to lose the audience. The movie experience is just going to be different from the book experience. Because if movie audience leave part 1 just disliking Cain and not seeing any redeeming quality in him, they're not going to go see part 2. I am excited for this as well. One thing the movie could do that the book couldn't is to show us more of Cain's perspective. And yes, part 1 of the book is mostly a lot of world building info dump and also Helena's inner thoughts. But scenes from Cain's perspective could replace that. But in order to have those Cain scenes, we already need to know what happened in part 2. So that should be part 1 movie. And even if part 1 gets condensed, there's so much happening in part 3. Combination of part 1 and part 3 is also 500 pages long, same length as part 2. And as mentioned, so many things happen in part 3. It's very fast-paced, so I think majority of part 2 of the film is going to be covering part 3 of the book. I got my second copy of Alchemized, and I'm going to show you how I put the overlays using vellum paper this time and art Avondale just released on Alchemized. That's Arcane Farron, and after cutting it to size, I just put it on the desired page. And here's the pros and cons of using vellum paper for overlays as I show you the other images. It is much thinner than transparency film, so it doesn't bulk up the book. And unlike transparency film, it also doesn't stain the page over it. However, I cannot get it to lie flat. This has been in the book for days now and it still curls up. All these new images are from part 1 of Alchemized, and you can find them in Avondale's Instagram page. And I hope they do more for part 2 and part 3 of the book, but as you can see in comparison to the transparency film, it just looks a lot better and lays flat, but it does stain, so I have to put a protective vellum paper cover on it. So personally, I prefer the transparency film, but vellum is easier to work with, does not stain or add bulk to the book.